Yeah, well, my neighbor was there.
I don't think I know that. Remember, no. Airport, like, I'm sure one more.
In Guatemala, it's horrible. It's,
Oh, yeah.
depends, they're redoing their main highway, so it takes a long time. In the best of times, it's a 4-hour bus ride. But it can be worse. Yeah, and it's on the other side of the country, so it's not that far mile-wise, but the roads are quality, except right now. The
Yeah.
roads are good quality, but it's just winding through the mountains, so it takes a long time. Okay, so good evening. I hope you all had a nice vacation or did something interesting. I did something interesting. I was just sharing, I got to go to visit the new people that are dyeing our yarn. And it was an amazing experience because not only are they using azo-free dyes, but their dyes are also not damaging the water that they're putting their effluent in. And they are also recycling the vast majority of their water. So they're very super conscious of this. And I see, so we've always worked with what apparently are middlemen. So now we've seen what it looks like on the other side, and they're very artisanal. So it's all done by hand. So it's in with chemicals, but it's with big vats and people going like this. It was really amazing to see.
Where is this?
In a town called San Andres Chicol in Guatemala.
Near Capua or?
So it took us about a half an hour by bumpy car ride to get there. So not so far. So if you think back a couple of weeks, what we talked about last lecture was why we needed quality for our brand, what we needed to do in order to achieve quality, and how we built up some standards in spite of the challenges of language and culture, and how we do try to make use of mistakes so that the people still are paid fairly.
You have screen. Did you want to see that screen? You want that projected?
I had it projected a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I know. You know what? It's just funny. These things sometimes.
Yes, but thank you. I can't see in the back of my head. I did check a little while.
It's just funny how sometimes if there's no movement, that it'll just turn off.
Okay, so yes, I did want you to see something. All right. So today we're going to talk about fair pay. So last week we finished with this. So why isn't this fair pay? So if you go on to a handmade site like Etsy and you Google for Whippeal or Mayan Weaving, you'll find dozens of sellers that are selling beautiful things. And they don't look so cheap. They're $50 to $100. But why do I say this isn't fair pay? Because for a woman weaver to weave that, she takes several months to do that. And actually, the Maya women who buy from her are going to save up their money in order to be able to afford that. And then they're going to wear it for a long time. So if we're seeing something that's $50 to $100 on it, what probably happened is that weaver was in a lot of need for money. Maybe somebody in her family was sick. Maybe she didn't have enough to get food that week. And so when a seller or a buyer or a tourist came up and bargained with her, because we want to bargain with people, then she probably gave it up for less than it was worth because she needed the money right then. So that's why I say it's not fair pay. So how do we determine what's fair pay in Myanmar? So it's not that easy. So we started this project, the cooperative, with the idea of alleviating poverty. So obviously we want to pay fairly, but what does that mean? Does that mean we're going to pay by the piece? We're going to pay by the hour? We have to give people different rates for different kinds of work? We didn't really know what we were going to be doing. So one resource that we've had is the Fair Trade Federation. And the Fair Trade Federation is here in the United States, North America, and it's a trade association of a lot of different companies involved in selling fair trade into the North American market. So it could be people selling coffee or chocolate or other farm goods. It can be people like us selling artisanal products. It can be the fair trade cafes or fair trade retail stores. So why did we pick Fair Trade Federation to join? Is because they have a really strong reputation and a very high bar to belong to. And we really wanted to have a third-party verification that what we were doing really was a fair treatment of the artisans that we worked with. And the Fair Trade Federation is also collaborates closely with the World Fair Trade Organization, which is also has a very good reputation. So we applied to be members and we were accepted. And so we have that third-party verification, but we also got a lot more because unlike in my corporate life, in my corporate experience where we were always in competition and secrecy, when the Fair Trade Federation, it's all about helping each other. So when we go to an annual conference, the people with more experience are there to help us without experience know how to do things better. So we learned lots of things. Sometimes I learned things I didn't even know I was going to need to know. But that's where I learned all about importing and exporting. It's where I learned about the requirements that we had to comply with for the Consumer Product Safety Commission when we were bringing in children's products. It's where I learned how to do digital marketing, and it's where I learned how not to be a gringa in my marketing. So it's been a very valuable experience for us. So in fair trade, the fair trade principles are very comprehensive. So create opportunity for underserved communities, develop transparent and accountable relationships, build capacity, promote fair trade, pay promptly and fairly, support safe and empowering working conditions, ensure the rights of children, cultivate environmental stewardship, and respect cultural identity. So I think I've been talking about some of these issues this past series, but the issue of paying fairly and promptly is what we're talking about tonight, because that's been one of the most challenging for us to figure out. So the paying promptly, we had part of that right on because we were advancing the money for the cooperative to buy their cotton or buy their materials. And we were paying the women for the products that they were making every month. So we weren't paying the footloom weavers every month, so we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we were pretty much complying with that. So anyway, the paying promptly was less problematic, but the paying fairly, that's where the big challenges come. So we're back to metrics. So what are we going to pay for? How are we going to know the quantity of work? So I created forms. So the seamstresses had to fill out a form every day there was one form for each product that they would be making, and she would write down her name, what she how many of whatever it was she produced, and how long it took. So that happened with the weavers, and with the with the seamstresses. With the footloom weavers, they would do something similar. There was a clipboard for each of the looms, and they would write each day how many hours they'd worked and how much yards or meters of fabric that they had made. Then the setup of the loom is the most intensive part of weaving. And so that's a whole nother process that takes a team of weavers. So they also had their piece of paper where they could record what they were setting up and how long it would be taking for each of the parts of that setup. And so I put all of that into spreadsheets so we could analyze it. And that's when I decided it was time to get some help. So I brought Gladys on board to do a lot of that input into the Excel worksheets. Early on, we established a system of coordination. So in seamstresses, a coordinator would be responsible for a product, and then she would be responsible when it was supposed to be produced that there was enough materials or enough of the right kind of fabric. And the same for the weavers. They each had a loom, there was a coordinator for each loom, and she would be responsible for making sure there was enough yarn to weave whatever the design is that they were assigned to do. So I took all these spreadsheets and I calculated the averages. So for example, how many cosmetic bags were made and how many hours it took. So I would get an average rate for that. Or how many meters of fabric were woven for each different kind of fabric and how many hours it took. So I would have a rate. And that my idea was to take those rates and set the average to be so that the average worker would earn the right amount according to the fair pay. So how did I decide what was fair pay? Was by benchmarking it against other income opportunities in Kahula. So we would benchmark the seamstresses or the weavers, which are skilled work, against skilled work in Kahula. And when we ended up with coordination, the coordination was paid benchmarked against professional people. For this footloom setup part, I asked Lori, if you remember, Lori was a person who helped us in the very beginning, and then she helped us with quality standards 2 weeks ago. And now I asked her for help with this loom setup because it was very confusing to me. And she gave me some metrics that we could use to set up what the pay is for the setup. So the women would still record their time, and we would allocate the pay for that based on the number of hours they had spent on that. Every month, this is still true, the seamstresses hand in their products with a sheet of paper per product that lists how many each person made. And that's how they're paid. So they're paid based on what they hand in before there's been a quality check. When the quality check happens, then they receive anything back that needs to be reworked, but we don't have any system that says you have to take back money for that. You keep the money for that. So they're pretty conscientious. I don't think it's an issue. Of course, they don't like reworking, but they do understand after the work of our first quality control coordinator about the importance of the quality. So they accept it, and they really do pay attention to not handing in poor quality products because they know they'll come back. So all these averages and all these quantities are all put on another spreadsheet, and their pay is calculated each month. I forgot. So the footloom weavers, they were paid before when they finished a roll. So when the weavers finished 100 meters, they would get paid. So in the work of the footloom weavers, they would rotate looms each day so that they could share the challenges of the difficult weaves or share the benefit of the easy weaves. And so when a roll was finished, and it's 100 meters long, that's when they would get paid. And that's why I said before they weren't really being paid promptly, because they might have to wait a long time. So what we did is start a process where they would cut the fabric every month, so they would be able to be paid every month. And so then we were compliant with paying promptly. So all of this information is on this spreadsheet, which is even impressive to me to look at. So when the women would come to ask a question about their pay, and I would show them the spreadsheet and talk about it, I could tell they really didn't understand it, which didn't surprise me. So what we did is we invited somebody trusted from Grupo Cajola to come and talk to the women in MOM to explain all of it. And so that made things a little bit better. What made it really better was when women with some secondary education entered into the group, and then they were able to explain to their compañeras how it was working or what it meant. And they could also challenge something that didn't seem right more effectively because they understand how the system worked. So all along, we are working with my original calculations of adding up all those averages. And what I did in the beginning also was multiply that rate by 75%, because I was my way of factoring in the fact everybody was brand new and that over time they would improve their speed and their proficiency. So, but I was always on the outlook for a better way to do that. So the better way to do that came one day. So first to tell you, we had our most important customer until the pandemic was an organization called Pulsera Project. They're an organization here in the United States that works with a cooperative in Nicaragua, and they do really amazing work with teachers of all levels all over the United States, helping them teach their students about life and conditions in Nicaragua. And so Pulseras are a part of that project. So they had reached out to us some years ago, could our weavers weave Pulseras? And of course they can. And then they came to us to ask if we could make a special bag that you can find in the tourist markets of Guatemala. And we said yes. So out of this comes two stories. The first story is, of the bag, we had our most proficient seamstress make up a sample, and it took her 3 hours. Pulsera Project had given us a target cost. So when we put all that together, we could meet their cost, but not make any profit. And we decided, okay, this is okay because it's going to provide work. So we'll accept that it doesn't have a profit to it. But after the women had made hundreds of bags, they were very proficient. Instead of taking 3 hours, it took 2 hours or less. So one day I saw that they had been earning significantly more than the other seamstresses and wanted to, so I cut their rate back to reflect the 2 hours instead of the 3. On that payday, they were, of course, at my desk that afternoon saying what happened, and I explained it. And even if they weren't happy, they accepted it. And my lesson was I should have told them ahead of time what was happening and why. The second story about the Pulsera Project people is they came one day to do a time study of the pulseras to make sure that we were paying them a fair wage. In that process, first of all, I learned that I had omitted the setup time when I had calculated their work. And so we did increase their pay, not so much, but they had to be increased because of that. But the best thing that happened was there was a way for me to figure out how to do a time study. There was a system, a process. So we started to implement that. When we implemented that, I'm happy since my 75% calculation wasn't too bad in very many of the products. But some of the products, there was a need to increase their wages. And we had picked what order to do the time studies on based on what the seamstresses or I were concerned about. So we have raised their pay on maybe a handful of products. So that's good. We have been doing all the products. We have almost finished with the sewing products. We have done a handful of weaving products. We need to finish the weaving, and then we're going to tackle that setup time. So it's sitting there waiting to be done. So I feel good about that. When they raise the pay of one of their products, of course, that increases the cost. When the cost goes up, then the weaving cooperative charges us in the United States a new price. And then we have to decide, my mom in the States, we have to decide what are we going to do about it. So in most cases, we've increased our price in a similar way. And actually, in spite of our nervousness, that most of those price increases have been accepted, except the backstrap weavers came to us some time ago, and they said they have done a time study of their table runners, which are beautiful and involve that brocading that's very time consuming. And they said their new, that in their analysis of their time study, they're only receiving half the pay that they should, that we should be doubling their pay. So in the United States, we're like, oof, because already that's our one of our most expensive products. It already has a tiny margin on it. And we don't sell that many of it. And how are we going to raise the price? How are we going to double the price? So what we did is a market study here to see what we thought our customers would be able to pay for that. We went back to the weavers in Kahola and we said, we don't think we'll have any market at all if we double the price, but we think we could give a shot at 50% increase in the price. If you accept that, that's what we'll do. If you don't accept that, we're just going to have to sadly say we don't make that product anymore. We like that product because it reflects 100% the artisanal heritage of the women. So after consideration, they decided they were okay with that they would take the 50% increase in the pay, and we would continue. So we held our breath here and raised the price. And I have to say, we didn't sell that many before. We still don't sell that many, but at least we're still selling them. And a good thing was our most important wholesale customer, she accepted it and is selling them. So it worked out okay. So we talked about fair pay, and fair pay, if you define it as we're paying a fair wage in our context of kahola for skilled or professional work, then we're doing okay. But if you define fair pay as the pay that you need in order to live a dignified life, in order to have access to housing, to clothing, to health, food, leisure time, well, we are really far short of that. And so that's a really big challenge. I don't have an answer for that. That's our challenge. And it's a challenge that we're trying to meet in Grupo Kahola itself as well. So I'll give you a rundown of economics in Kahola. So food is not that expensive. If you have your own corn, bean, and squash field, you have basic food. And we are very close like 2 hours from the coast, so we have easy access to tropical food. The clothing is not horrible. The women's huipil and corte are all woven in Kahola, and the men and children buy their clothes from Paka, which is the distribution of the things we all throw away into our clothes recycling, and how they get distributed to us in Guatemala is through the PACA system. So clothing isn't overwhelming. Healthcare in Guatemala is free. However, the corrupt Guatemala government doesn't provide any medicine or supplies. So you get a great doctor, a great nurse, but nothing else. So it's not really satisfactory. Education is supposed to be free, but because the government doesn't supply the schools with materials or books, then the parents still have to pay for their kids to go. So that issue of a living wage is important still. In Grupo Cajola this past year, they did a review of all of our employees and their pay to this was for the first time, to make sure everybody is equitable across all the projects. And now they're working on how we can include vacation, sick pay, things like that into the pay structure. So although that vacation sick pay legally exists in Guatemala, it doesn't exist in communities. Well, it doesn't exist probably in 70% of the country where we're all in informal employment. So this is kind of ground trailblazing for Cajola, but we're optimistic we're in that right path. So that's my spiel for today. Next week, I'm talking about how education intersects with development. Do I have questions today? Yeah.
I remember you previously mentioned in a different lecture that there have been a few started working in had to give up other jobs working in like so do they know, I guess, going into that like they're not getting what some people consider like a living wage, so like how do they just like is there a way to like have to them maybe or justify?
No, because the context in Cajola is nobody makes a living wage, right? So their context is this is something instead of nothing. And they didn't complain. It's us who want to make sure that we're doing it in a fair way. I mean, seriously, that's the context. So although I would like it to be a living wage, their context, I mean, when they're working in the field, that's their own field. So it's not, or we have done interviews with the various women in the co-op, and that's what they say. They traded eagerly the life of doing the agricultural work for working something, making something beautiful and getting compensated for it. So it's just a different context. Like you have to look at it a different way, but I'm looking at it, I would like to stop that migration, this has to be different. Yeah.
I guess like another way, did they also see the investment for like banking that comes along?
Do they say, well, that banking, yes, because all of a sudden when that money went into their bank account, they had control over it. They absolutely saw that advantage. Yeah.
Are you like adjusting prices based on cotton? This is like
We did. We had a huge, well, we had, after the pandemic, everything went up, including our cotton went up a lot. So we had to take last April, we took pretty decent size price increases on a lot of things, along with the rest of the world.
does that impact the wages?
Yes, we increased their wages too. Because they have to pay for more. Our materials, some of our materials like zippers went up 30%, our Insulbright, those things went up 30%. Things went up horrible. They didn't get a 30% increase in wages, but they did get one.
Do you expect to see those kind of go back to normal? Or do you have like a time frame?
When do prices go back?
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't happened in my life. Once they get there, they're there, right?
How do taxes work?
How to pack it, taxes. Taxes?
Oh,
What do you mean, legally or how we play them?
Both.
So legally, the tax system in Guatemala is very regressive. The oligarchy doesn't allow themselves to be taxed, so the tax gets pushed on to everything else. And everybody, regardless, pays, well, no. So there's a sales tax or tax on value added, and if you buy from, so if you buy in the market, you don't pay that. So if you have a legal identity, you have to pay that tax. So what we have done, my mom being an example, is we have a legal identity that actually relates to Eduardo. And when we need to do something that requires a legal invoice, we use he has organized his own ownership of distributor of Maya Mom products. And so we can use that if we need to issue a invoice. And conversely, if we buy from somebody that we wanted to be part of that, we can do that. But a lot of people we can do business in cash in. And I would say in Kakalak itself, the vast majority is totally cash. The taxing authority is trying to change that because they have started to come through to make sure people are complying. And more things are being automated. So they're really trying to make sure all of us little guys are paying our taxes. I'm okay with that personally. I think that I don't like the taxes. I don't like them here either. But I think in order to be functioning, that we're going to need to be more and more compliant with all of that. But it's still, it's like this, when I said the labor programs, that's part of Guatemala's labor system. And Kabbalah doesn't comply with that because it's all a cash economy. But we are starting to comply with those things. And so it's not nice, but I think it's very important in order to be credible and
Is there an income tax?
no,
So,
no, there's a tax on sales, but there's no income tax.
so they don't have the workers don't have the weavers on it.
No,
Yeah.
no. And I don't think they will. Well, when we get everybody quote legalized, there's a tax, like a payroll tax that the organization will have to pay, and then the employees have to. But the weavers, while they're paid by the piece, escape a lot of that law. They don't.
follow up on that one. And for their taxes, what do they have access to social services? I know you mentioned
When they
hospital.
start to pay that, they would have access, like if they started to pay that, the payroll tax, they would start to have access to social services, such as it is. Yeah. No, you pay to be in the social service, participate in that system, but I don't know.
How about that?
It's there. No, it's there. It's just not. If I need a medical attention in Guatemala, I will have no hesitation going into the private system. I would have super hesitation going into the public. Not because of the quality of the personnel, but just because of the quality of the support and all of that. But I consider their private system to be very good and less expensive than ours.
Yeah, really.
Is there anything that you want to highlight with the private healthcare system?
Pardon me?
Is there anything you want to highlight with the
Private
private health?
Well, I just have confidence in it. First of all all the personnel trained as doctors in Guatemala, I have found to be competent. I don't find incompetence there. I just find the level of facilities to be lacking, and in the public sector, as I mentioned, there's no supplies, there's no medicine. So you can go to so we have a health center in Capolat. Well, doctors that I've met that have worked there are very good. But they say, like, you need this medicine, but you have to go pay for it. Not only that, you have to probably go somewhere into Quetzaltenango in order to get it. So it's for people that don't have money, it's definitely an obstacle. And where does the money go? There's a budget for all of that stuff, but it's very siphoned off by corruption. Okay.
I just have one more question. Do they use traditional medicines
Yeah,
to help themselves?
The Western system doesn't use them, but there's a very strong system of traditional medicines. And what's very strong in Guatemala is the system of midwife. I mean, it's very, very strong. In fact, they have their own associations and things like that, and they do really good work. And over time, the midwives collaborate with the Western doctors as well. So it's all done in a very secure way. So that's very positive. So. And yes, traditional medicine are used even by people who claim they don't believe in that Maya thing anymore. But they've retained a lot of that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Totally. It's moving here a little bit slowly, understanding.
Yeah. Or start to study and see what is things work.
No, and I had a problem with my foot when I was there, and I went to a bone person. Like, that's a traditional medicine person. It wasn't an orthopedic. That's a traditional person. She knew it.
Do you mind sharing what they did?
She examined what was my problem, and she told me what was my problem. I had an issue on my foot, and she squeezed it and told me what was the matter.
Did she give any herbs or anything?
No, not for my feet.
Damn, I've had some very miraculous experiences like that too, so I wonder, like,
Well, I believe they know what they're talking about, so I haven't had any miracles, but
well, I mean, it seems like miracles, we just don't understand why it works,
Yeah.
Why-
oh no, they
They have all this
for hundreds of thousands,
It's all,
thousands of years, they've studied what's around them, so they know things that work and things that don't work. Okay,
oh,
so I'll see you next Tuesday.
thank you.
And you want this set up, right?
I mean, like 75% of our clients are not running late, so what can we say about that, A lot about it, but nobody's listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I'll see you next week. Do you know what class I'm in?
You told me B one
I
twenty.
told you. Oh,
B 121, yeah.
Thank you.
See you. Well, I'll be in contact if I forget something.
Okay.
Oh, and the stuff that's recording. For Miracle, so they like, oh my God.
Okay,
Honest.
got all the questions.
Okay, just hold it. I forgot about stopping and stop.